Hello there, it's just turned midnight here in Moscow. You're watching RT International. We'll start with breaking news too from Syria because one of the country's fighter jets has been shot down by US-led forces. Damascus says the plane was conducting a counter-terrorist raid when it was brought down to the south of Raqqa. Damascus-based journalist Ala Ibrahim joins us live now. Good evening to you, Ala. As we were hearing there, the Pentagon has confirmed the incident, saying it was a retaliatory strike, their words, after the Syrian plane bombed opposition forces. What forces exactly do you think the US is referring to there?
The statement of the US refers to the Syrian Democratic Forces, which is the militia group operating along with the US-led coalition trying to take the city of Raqqa from the control of ISIL. But we can also confirm, according to several military sources from the Syrian military operating in that area, that the fighter jet was actually carrying out airstrike against a convoy from ISIL moving from the town of As-Sakhna into the town of Al-Rasafa, 30 kilometers southeast of Al-Raqqa city, and that the fighter jet in no way posed any direct or indirect threat to any militia group from those militia groups operating alongside the US-led coalition trying to get control or gain control of the city of Raqqa. But I think there is more to that story, and what's more to that story is that the US is trying to draw boundaries in the Syrian conflict and red lines for the Syrian army not to cross them, and trying to actually prevent the Syrian army from achieving two goals. The first goal is to limit the presence of the Kurdish militias, which is the backbone of the Syrian Democratic Forces. And the second purpose is to actually hinder the operation of the Syrian military to arrive to the city of Deir ez-Zor and break an ISIL siege on that city that has been ongoing for 2 years. To put things in perspective, if ISIL is pushed out of Raqqa, which seems to be the scenario, it's very likely that it will be pushed out through an agreement between the SDF and ISIL that will allow ISIL fighters a safe way out, and those fighters will then will have only one choice: to go to Deir ez-Zor and try to take the city from the hands of the Syrian government, since they have been actually encircling that city for the past 2 years.
So what do you think then will be the reaction and response from the Syrian government?
The Syrian battlefield is a very complicated one right now. It has the presence of various international and regional powers, starting from the United States, Russia, Syria, Iran, Hezbollah, the Lebanese Hezbollah. In addition to, now you have the involvement of the Iraqi army and Iraq. In addition to Turkey, all these regional powers, they are directly involved in the Syrian conflict right now. It's very difficult to speculate what will happen in upcoming days, but what I can tell you for a fact is that it seems that the Syrian army and the Syrian government are adamant on actually moving on with their operation to break the ISIL siege on the city of Deir ez-Zor, and trying actually to limit the ability of the US-led coalition and the US troops who are now on the ground in Syria, limiting their ability to move and limiting their ability to create influence centers on the Syrian battlefield. And we have to understand that this is not just a Syrian issue, this is more of an international conflict and power play between the US and Russia on Syria's territories.
So just finally, Ala, briefly, I mean, do you see this as a serious escalation?
This is part of an ongoing escalation that has been actually escalating for the past months or so, since the US carried out its first airstrike against pro-government forces that were trying to advance in the southern parts of Syria. Later on, by that strike, the US tried to limit the movement of the Syrian government forces and their allies. Back then, the Syrian army stopped its operation in southern Syria only to surprise the Americans by advancing and actually encircling the area they had set up camp in At-Tanaf in southeastern parts of Syria. Now it's a similar scenario. The Americans don't want the Syrian army to advance towards Deir ez-Zor. They don't want the Syrian army to actually be present as part of the operation to retake Al-Raqqa or to take any part of Al-Raqqa province, and the Syrian army won't accept it. I think it's up to the battlefield, and the developments of the battlefield will decide whether this will be escalated and how far the US is willing to go in order to stop the advancement of the Syrian army, because according to my sources, the Syrians and the Syrian military forces are willing to go as far as it gets to actually arrive to the city of Deir ez-Zor and continue to try and regain control of all of Syria.
OK, well, look, thank you ever so much for your insight into this. We have to leave it there. That was Ala Ibrahim, a Damascus-based journalist. Thank you. Well, the incident outside Raqqa, as Ala was saying, there is the latest in a series of US strikes against the Syrian armed forces. Over the past 3 months or so, the US-led coalition has conducted several bombing raids against pro-government forces near a training base where US-backed rebels are located. That happened in the Al-Tamf area near the border with Jordan there. The US claims to have issued prior warnings to the Syrian troops, which allegedly breached a so-called de-escalation zone. Peter Ford, former US ambassador to Syria and Bahrain, told us that the American military is willing to resort to any measures to protect the armed groups that it's supporting.
This new attack is by no means unprecedented. But let's not forget that the circumstances where this new attack took place, it appears that it took place in an area where the so-called Syrian Democratic Army, that is, rebels financed by the US, was operating in the vicinity of Raqqa. It's very much an American creation. It's their pet. And it appears that the Syrian plane may have been attacking their pet dog. And given that this is a very American operation, the attempt to drive ISIS from Raqqa city, then the Americans reacted to protect their toy.
In another development in Syria tonight, Iran says it has launched missile strikes against what it calls terrorist bases in Syria. For more on this now, we're joined by Emily Sue in the studio. Good evening to you again, Emily. So what are the latest developments here? What are the details?
Well, Andrew, the Iran Revolutionary Guard, which is an elite defense force in the country, they've released a statement confirming that they have launched several ground-to-ground missiles from western Iran into the Deir Zor region of eastern Syria. They say they were targeting bases of terrorists that they claim are responsible for those twin terrorist attacks in Tehran earlier last week. In this statement, the Revolutionary Guard also said that they managed to significantly destroy the terrorist base's infrastructure and also killed scores of them as well. And I believe also on the screen now we can now show some unverified video of purportedly showing the moment when this missile was launched. And this development is rather significant because this is the first time that Iran has launched a missile strike into Syria since they've been cooperating very closely with their Assad regime and joining their fight against extremists in the region.
You mentioned there it was sort of in retaliation to what happened on June the 7th in Tehran. Just remind us just exactly what happened then.
Well, militants have targeted two of the most important buildings in the capital city on June 7th. At first, a gunman stormed the parliament building and opened fire when it was in session. And then simultaneously, separate militants have detonated suicide bombs in the mausoleum of Ayatollah Khomeini, who's the founder of the Islamic Republic of Iran. So as you can imagine, very significant buildings. And those two attacks have led to the death of 18 people. And Islamic State has since claimed responsibility.
And at that time, what sort of reaction was there from Iran? Was there any indication it might carry out a missile strike like this today?
Well, following the attacks, as you can imagine, the government said that they were outraged and they have vowed retaliation, they have vowed revenge. And the senior officials have also came out and accused Saudi Arabia of being involved. They say that the fact that Islamic State has claimed responsibility for the twin attacks proves that Saudi Arabia has been involved. But bear in mind that Saudi Arabia and Iran, they are regional rivals, and the relationship between Riyadh and Tehran have really been increasingly tense. And of course, Iran has long accused Saudi Arabia of backing terrorists, which is something that Riyadh flat out denies.
And Iran has been involved in Syria, hasn't it, for some time?
Yes, as you know, a number of different parties and states are all involved in the Syrian conflict, but fighters from the Iran-backed Lebanese militant group Hezbollah, they were officially invited by the Assad regime to join the fight, and Iran has been providing military support, sending in trainers and advisors for the Assad forces as well. But as you can see, this is quite a significant development, as it's the first time Iran has launched missiles into Syria since the Syrian war started 6 years ago, Andrew.
OK, thanks, Emily. That was Emily Sue there with that update. We can get more insight too now, because we're joined by the editor-in-chief of Iran's Fars news agency, Saeed Mustafa Khoshcheshm. Good evening to you. Thanks very much for your time this evening. What's your perspective here? How big a development or escalation do you view these missile strikes?
Hi, thank you very much for inviting me. Well, Iran had already warned, as your colleague said, that it would strike back at the terrorists. And in tonight's statement that the IRGC Public Relations has given out, it is warned that this is the beginning. If the terrorists, embark on conducting any second attack on Iran, Iran would provide a much more vigorous response to them. And not just them, it has also warned the backers and sponsors, foreign sponsors of the terrorist groups, including regional and trans-regional. And when, the backers, and when Iran says trans-regional backers of the terrorist groups, it specifically means the United States. Now, it is believed by many in and outside Iran that the United States and many of its allies that are backing the terrorist groups in the region, especially in Syria, they need to reassess their estimates and assessments and the calculations with regard to Syria, because as you just mentioned in your earlier report, there have been clashes at Al-Tanf border crossing between Iraq and Syria a few days ago, when the Americans warned the Syrian troops and popular Iraqi troops to stay away from their own borders and banned them from exercising their sovereign rights and fight against the terrorist groups. And then they bombed them, launched missile and airstrikes on the Syrian troops and their popular allies, Hezbollah and others. Nobody in Tehran, of course, confirmed that, but American officials said that after that strike, they came also on their drone strike. The bombs didn't operate, but they were dropped exactly on their positions, on the Americans' positions. If this is true, no one, and I repeat that and I emphasize that no one in Tehran has confirmed that. But if that's true, it shows that Iran is warning the United States not to trouble Syria, Iran, and Russia's fight and campaign against terrorist groups, because conquering Al-Tanf border crossing has been an outstanding point in the war in Syria, even more important than Aleppo, the capture of Aleppo city itself.
Given what you said there, Saeed, and the strategic importance of that area, do you expect America to heed that warning, as you put it?
Well, Trump, I personally believe that Trump comes with much hue and cry to show the world that he is mad. He might do things that are unwise, but eventually this is not Trump himself that's running the United States. That's the strategy. And when Trump ascended to office, he was accompanied by over 50 generals. And I remember that former top general and top commander of IRGC, who is now a top official at the Expediency Council, Major General Mohsen Rezai of Iran, said that it's much better when you see the generals come to power in the United States, because they understand the power of Iran, its IRGC and army. In between, I don't know how much time we have, but I would like to raise a point that some kind of, I can say misuse has been made by some probably Israeli medias that are trying to convince the public and the world public opinion that Iran has struck the targets, ISIL targets tonight, with Shahab-3 missiles. That's not true. The range between the two, Western Iran and Eastern Syria, is no more than 800 kilometers. Iran is equipped with a barrage of different types of missiles, cruise and ballistic missiles. The IRGC said right now, just a few minutes ago, that it had launched 6 missile attacks on ISIL, and the missiles have flown through the Iraqi airspace, meaning that the missiles that it had used have been cruise missiles and not ballistic missiles. So Shahab, Qadr, and Sejil, that all traverse over 2,000 kilometers in range, they have not been used. Most probably, Iran could have used Qiyam, Qadr, and Zulfaqar missiles that fly for about less than 900 kilometers, from 7 to 900 kilometers. The IRGC said that it has launched ground-to-ground mid-range missiles. Qiyam, I personally believe, has been the choice. It is the organizational weapon system of the Iranian army, the ground troops of the regular forces of Iran. But because the mission has been carried out by the IRGC Aerospace Force, this could have been also used by them, because the Aerospace Force of the IRGC is also equipped with all types of short, mid, and long-range ground-to-ground, ground-to-air, air-to-surface missiles.
I see.
So I believe
yeah.
that Iran has used its Qadr or Qiyam missiles.
OK, look, we're running out of time, but very quickly then, just in your estimation, a brief answer, if you wouldn't mind. How much of an escalation is this tonight? I mean, from what you've said, the stakes have been raised and there's potential for things to get worse.
Well, right now we are at the height of the war in Syria, because the Iraqi Popular Forces and the Syrian army have been able to shake hands at their shared borders. They're moving upward towards north, towards Deir ez-Zor, and the Americans have warned them to stay back, and they have stressed that they would disregard this warning. And this use of missiles by Iran that has happened for the first time in a real combat zone after the revolution, after the war actually, with Iraq. This is a firm response to all the warnings that they've been issuing. This shows that Syria and Iran, Russia, others, they are very much serious about defeating ISIL in Deir ez-Zor and conquering the lands that Syria lost some 6 years ago, and removing the siege on Deir ez-Zor airbase. Now, as I said at the beginning of this interview, I believe that the United States, Saudi Arabia, and others need to revise their assessments and calculations, especially with regard to Syrian battlefield.
OK, Saeed, look, we'll leave it there. Really appreciate your time tonight. That was Saeed Mustafa Koshcheshem. He's the editor-in-chief of the news agency, the Iranian news agency Fars.
Thank you.
You're watching RT. We'll be back in 2 minutes.